Until recently, the dominant narrative has been the story of partition of the empire among the great powers, which ended with the empire's total collapse and disintegration. The fear of national obliteration loomed large during this period, and the Ottomans and Turkish historians scarcely mention the Christian people of the empire, neither as actors in Ottoman social and political life, still less as victims of massacres or other gross human rights violations. Instead, especially in Turkish historiography, the Christian communities are painted as the seditious agents of the imperialist great powers, continually intriguing against the Turkish state. The ethnic and religious minorities, for their part, center themselves within a narrative of persecutions and massacres against themselves. The overall theme of this history, if you read the Greek, Turkish, Bulgarian, and Assyrian history, the overall theme of this history is the community's maturation and national emergence, thanks in part to the benevolent intervention of the great powers. When we compare these two histories, we see that great powers inspired existential dread for panic among the dominant Turkish group and the hope of national salvation for the minorities. In this light, the controversies about the Armenian genocide can be understood in part as the deployment of two apparently contradictory historical narratives against one another. I always give the example: put one Turkish student and one Armenian student, let them discuss. The Armenian student will continually refer the massacres, killings, and human rights abuses, and Turkish student will contrary arguing separation, curbing the partition of the country, security, big powers, their policy against Turkish state. They are not listening each other. They are telling two different stories, but it is actually not two different stories. This is my basic argument. In A Shameful Act, I show that these two narratives are not contradictory at all. They are two sides of the same coin, complementary perspectives on a single course of the human events. Both must be sufficiently understood and appreciated in order to grasp the ambiguities and contradictions of the Ottoman Turkish history. Because there have been certain moments in Turkish history where national security of Turkish state and human rights became inseparably intertwined. One such moment came immediately after the First World War in 1918, between 1918 and 1923. Let me elaborate this point. According to the general understanding in Turkey, this is how we grow up, this is how I raised in Turkey, how I learned the history in Turkey. This is our understanding. This period is characterized as a war between Turks, between us, who desired after World War I to preserve their sole remaining territories as a legitimate successors of the Ottoman Empire, and the Armenians, Greeks, and the Kurds who wanted to establish their own nation states by partitioning Anatolia with the help of British, French, and Italians. The Treaty of Sèvres, according to our understanding, signed in August 1920, essentially decided the partition in favor of non-Turkish nationalities, in favor of Greeks, Armenians, and Kurds. For the Turks, therefore, Sèvres remain a black mark in our history. The Ottoman leaders who signed the agreement were sentenced to death as traitors by the nationalist movement in Ankara. For the other nationalities, although Sèvres agreement did not fully reflect their demands for territory, the treaty represents an unprecedented historical opportunity to resolve issue in their favor. A similar positive attitude can be seen on the Turkish side in regard to the Treaty of Lausanne, 1923, which guaranteed Turkish domination on Anatolia. For the Turks, Lausanne stands a milestone and validation of their continued national existence. Inversely, the other nationalities see this treaty as a great historic injustice. Even though, this is now my argument, contradictory assessment of Sèvres and Lausanne exist, I think the underlying logic is the same. Both sides regard the immediate post-war era as a period of struggle for territory. Should the Ottoman state retain its integrity and independence? Should new states be permitted to arise on the empire's former land? If so, how should the borders of these new states be defined? These are the questions they try to give an answer. Which party is entitled to claim which territories? Armenian would say, this is historic Armenia, our land. Kurds say, we were here before the Armenians, this is our historic land. Turks would say, come on, we are governing this region since 11th century, this is our right. So the problem is underlying which territory can be claimed by which ethnic group. However, I showed in A Shameful Act, territorial conflict are not the whole story. There is another story of Sèvres and Lausanne and human rights history, which concerned the atrocities perpetrated by the Ottoman government against its Christian population during the World War I. From this perspective, the question of that period was, what can be done about the wartime crimes against the Armenians? How should the perpetrator be punished? Conceptualizing history along the axis of human rights and punishing the Turks as described in the documents of that period opens an entirely neglected dimension, namely the connection between the Armenian genocide and the establishment of Turkish Republic. The victorious Allied powers agreed that the Turks had organized the massacres of other people, above all Armenians. Thus, it was necessary to punish the Turks in order to rescue the minority groups from Turkish domination and prevent further massacres. I'm reading now from a letter written by British commissioner from Istanbul. His name is Webb, and sent this letter April 3rd, 1919 to Paris Peace Conference. Quote, in order to punish all of those persons who are guilty of the Armenian horrors, it is necessary to punish the Turks as a group. Therefore, I propose that the punishment be given on a national level through the partitioning up of the last Turkish Empire, and on a personal level by trying those high officials who are on the list in my possession, and in a manner that would serve as an example for the successors. End quote. So, Turks should be punished in two ways because of the massacres. One, partition of the remaining territory among different groups. This means against the sovereign right of Ottoman state, there must be new states in that region as punishment. And second, punishment of the individuals. The important question is, what was the attitude of Turkish nationalist movement in Ankara, especially Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, regarding that question? How Turkish nationalist movement react or answer to that question? In order to understand the event of the time, you have to recall that we had two different governments at that period between 1919 and 1922. One was the government in Istanbul as the legal successors of the Ottoman Empire, and the other is the new emerging national movement centered in Ankara. So there were always conflict, but negotiation, cooperation between these two, Ankara and Istanbul, during all that period.